Hi, this is Everett's Watercolors. Welcome to my classroom. Now today I'm going to do a demonstration of painting a tree. But it's going to be a little bit different. First of all, I'm going to start out with a drawing on the tree on my left over here, an oak tree. And I'm going to do a little design drawing and also add some sketches, add some more information to it. Then I'm going to transfer that to a watercolor paper and do a color study. So let's go to my painting table and let's get started. Now here's a sketch I started to make a composition. I've got the tree shape, the trunk, the branches, and the leaves, and I've added a small building in the background. Yeah, the first step I'm going to do is take that initial sketch. I'm going to add in some more lines. This is a dark lead pencil, so I can do some shading. So it's dark lead, a design sketch I'm going to do. I'm really putting in the background shading. This will be a dark against light. So I've got the dark, there's a dark tree behind, and so I'm shading that in with a very dark value with the thick leaded pencil. And you'll notice here that I've got dark against light. So I've got the dark trees in the background silhouetting the light foreground, or the light foreground building, which is white. I'm also putting some of the shadow and some of the shapes in here. There'll be a shadow up on the rooftop. I'm assuming the light is coming from the left to the right, so the shadows will be reflecting that way. I'm building in the shape here. This is design, so I'm designing my painting here, and I'm adding it to the right side. Now here I'm doing a dark behind light. The tree trunk is light, and the background tree is dark, so I'm shading that in. Also, right there at this point here, I've also got a fence line over here that I'm going to add to the design, and adding a little more shape to the side of the tree. Now I'm working up into the leaf, up into the branches, adding some major branches here. Again, this is design drawing just to give me some ideas of the shapes and sizes of everything compared to the foreground and the background. The tree will be in the foreground, and the background tree will be dark, and the house will be in the background. So I'm adding some more branches here, the top of the trunk here. Now I'm going to start adding in some of the foliage, and I always make the edges very irregular, no straight lines, give it some characteristic of a large tree. And I've added in some more design. There's the fence line on the right, and I've added a little bit of shadow on the house. So that's my design drawing. Now transfer this over to a piece of 140-pound cold pressed Gemini paper, quarter sheet, and here's a close-up of the drawing that I put on the watercolor paper. Now I'm going to do a color study, which means I'm going to choose colors and brush strokes. My first step is to wet the upper portion of the painting. That's a 2-inch flat wash brush. And I use cerulean blue, a light blue, light value. It's about 50% water, 50% paint. And my large 3/4 inch natural hair brush. Using large brush strokes. Just covering the paper here now, just getting around. Now this will really be the sky color. The light blue will just be the sky. So I'm going in just to put that color in there. Really working wet on wet. Now I'm going to paint around some of those. There's the There's a fence line there I'm painting around. I don't care about the tree. I'll be painting darker there anyway. Here I'm shaping out some of the rooftop with the edge of the brush, the flat part of the brush, painting around that. It'll be a white house, so I'm going to keep the paper white there. I don't want to paint over the top of the house. But the tree doesn't matter. I'll be putting darker paint there anyway. And here I'm painting around the fence line. So we get that light value into the background. Now I'm mixing up a little bit of green number 1. Again, it's a light value. And I'm just going to put that color up into the trees. Start some tree color. Get some green, some light green. And it's really wet on wet. That paper is still wet from the blue wash I just did. So I'm adding that green number 1 up into the trees, building up some of the foliage. And I know this is going to dry lighter, so I'm just putting in a light color just to get started on the shape of the leaves. Building the outline and looking at how much of a tree it will cover the foliage. Now I'm going to pick up a little more green number 1 and add a little bit more color in there, because this is going to dry very light. So I'm just adding a little more color up in there to give me a little more color to work with. Again, a color study. I'm just working on colors that I'm going to use possibly in a final painting. Here I'm just experimenting, finding out what colors I like. This is a dot spray bottle, palette in the bottle with my yellow lemon. And I'm going to use that to give me some texture, but also to add color to the tree. I don't have to use brushes on top of this. I use the spray bottle just to add color to that green. And this is green number 1 in the dot spray bottle. And I'm going to use a light touch, just a light pressing touch, add some dots of green. Again, building the foliage, building up the color into that tree for tree foliage. I know this is going to dry light, so I'm putting a lot more paint on there, wet on wet, with that wet surface. And adding in some more yellow lemon. A little light touch. Gives me a dot spray. Adding color to that foliage. I'm going to let that dry. You see how much lighter it started. Now the foreground colors are basically the same colors I used in the tree. I used green number 1, a little bit of yellow lemon, and cerulean blue. I put that in there already, but I'm going to show you. I just brushed it in with a brush. I did a graded wash of a mixture. Now I added a little color. Also added a barn here in the composition. I used a little pyro red and put a little barn on the right hand side, just to kind of complete the composition. Now I'm going to mix up some of the tree trunk colors. Cobalt blue. Then I'm going to add in burnt sienna and yellow ochre. Now I'm going to use these 2 or 3 colors on this tree trunk, and I'm going to try something new here. This is going to be basically a very textured and variable colored tree trunk. So I'm mixing up the colors here to give me a nice start on what colors I want to use. A little bit of brown, a little bit of blue. I'm using a round brush, my medium brown brush, silver brush. I'm going to start with the edge of the tree trunk. Now, layer number 1, this is just the first layer. I'm going to start putting in the blue, and as I realize the blue recedes. It's in the background part of the trunk, so the blue will have your eye look like it's further away. So on the edge of the trunk, I want to give it some depth, so I'll put the blue on the outside edge of the trunk. Now I'm going to work on some of the design of the tree trunk. I'm going to put in some grooves and some rough bark look using the blue. I'm going to work on both sides, both the branches and the upper branch is there next to the trunk, and then the trunk itself. And I'm going to move that blue around. I'm going to make some different marks on here, just adding a little bit of color here to get started. I'm going to try to make a design of this trunk a little bit different than what I normally would do. Using a round brush, getting in some shapes, some texture, a little bit of dark value here on the tree trunk. I want to try to give it an interesting look. I want to try to give it a rough look. I want to give it the look of an oak tree, and I'm using this blue to give me that shadowy side or shadowy edge of the tree trunk itself. Adding here color here to shape the little grooves and design of the tree trunk itself. Now we're moved into the burnt sienna. I'm adding the brown burnt sienna now, and brown is a warmer color, so it's going to come forward compared to the cobalt blue, which recedes. So the front part of the trunk will have more brown to it because it's a forward section of the tree trunk. And again, I'm filling in some of the, I'm leaving whites there for right now, adding in the brown with that blue. Going back and forth, adding some more blue to the edges of the tree because they recede. Some edges of the trees will have blue edges because they recede. They're further away from your eye, so they look further away. The edge of the tree is blue so that it recedes away. Again, this is really a visual optical illusion that the blue will be further away than the brown. So the optical illusion of blue and brown gives you that sense that the blue is further away than the brown. So that's why I'm choosing these two colors. I'm designing this a little way to give me a little texture on the trunk and to give it a different look. This tree is really the impact area of this painting, so I would really want to make this really stand out much more than anything else on the painting. So the tree becomes the most important object. So I'm spending a lot more time here on the design and the actual structure of the trunk itself. And putting a little bit of shadow pattern here at the base. Now I'll bring it up here to give you a little close-up view. You can see the multiple color here of the cobalt blue and burnt sienna mixture. Gives an interesting textured look of the trunk. And I'm just getting started because I want to add some more here. So mix up some more cobalt blue. I'm going to do a second layer. I'm going to add in a darker value of that cobalt blue, which means I'll go over that blue. It's there. When you add pigment to an existing color, when you layer another color on top of it, it makes it darker. So I want that edges to go back even further. So I'm adding more blue to give it more depth, to make it go back into the painting. And to give those forward grooves a little more contrast, a little more definition of the grooves in the tree. So basically I've added more value to that blue value I put on the initial layer 1. This will enhance the value of that painting. It will enhance the shape of that tree. And now I'm going back in with the burnt sienna and go on top of the other brown. I'll make that a little bit darker. So I'm really enhancing the colors that I started out with, putting a little burnt sienna on top of the existing burnt sienna, again to give it more color, a little more deeper value. And I think it gives it a rougher look, a more textured look when the colors are darker, and add a little more depth into the structure of that tree. So what I'm doing is building this tree trunk up in stages with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, adding a little detail here to the branches and to the structure of the trunk to make it really look like a rugged old oak tree. Adding some more browns, more paint, more texture, a little more shape to the tree, to the edges, defining the edges a little more, using the burnt sienna and using here I'm building into the root system at the bottom of the base of the tree. A little more character, a little more definition of the base of the tree. So building this up in stages gives me a chance to make little corrections. Now bring it up close to you to let you see the layer 2. You can see now how more defined the tree trunk is. A lot more texture, a lot more color, more interesting to look at. Now I'm mixing up a darker mix, layer number 3. I'm going to put another layer. What I've done, I've added a little bit of blue to this mixture of burnt sienna, and that will darken the brown into a dark brown. And I'm using the 1.5 inch flat brush, silver brush, and I'm using a dry brush stroke. I'm laying the brush down flat, and I'm dragging it down the whole length of the trunk. And what I'm doing now is adding the final layer and texture to that trunk. I want that brown to be overlaying the blue to really give it a real look of a trunk with a lot of grooves in it. And the brown will give it a little bit of continuity, a little bit of unity to the color of that tree trunk. It'll also make it look older and also make it look more rugged. A lot of texture. Now one final touch here, still on the trunk, I'm adding a lot more detail. Here I'm adding a little bit of dark ultramarine in with that mix. I'm making almost a black, a real dark brown black. I'm adding some character now to the trunk. Little knots, knot holes, little grooves. I'm re-emphasizing the texture on that bark. So I'm putting in some shadows, putting in some grooves with that dark value that I mixed up. A little bit of burnt sienna mixed in with ultramarine gives me a real dark brown. So I'm carving out the shape here of the internal structure of that bark. I'm going to give it some character, give it a little more definition of an old oak tree that's been around for a long time. And the bark has grown rough as it's grown up. Adding a little more detail to that base coat I had down. Take a look at that. You can see the real definition of the bark and the texture and the character of that oak tree. And I think that turned out really nice. So this composition is coming along very nicely. Now I'm going to start with the leaves. I'm going to use a stencil brush. Now this is a new technique. I'm taking an old stencil brush and I've taken lemon yellow, and what I've used to put I'm shaping the contour of the leaves around the outside. So I started with yellow lemon. Now these are the leaves that are closest to you as you look at a tree. These are the forward color of the tree. There'll be yellow mixed in with green, a yellow-green mix. So again, I'm really experimenting here with this. Again, as a color study, I'm experimenting with how I'm going to paint these leaves. Now I'm mixing a darker value now. Put a little bit of yellow ochre in with that green and yellow mix. The green and yellow, a little bit of yellow ochre, gives me a little duller. And now I'm going to paint the in-between leaves, the ones in the background, the inner layers. That's how I got that extra color. So I leave the forward leaves white and bright, or yellow and bright. And those inner leaves, or background leaves, were filled in with that mixture with a small brush. Now next I'm going to work on the background. And there's a background tree I have here, and I did on my value study, I made this dark. So I'm going to use a dark color here, a mixture of green mixed in with that brown mixture I had before, just adding a little bit of green to that mixture. A little bit of hooker's green, gives me a nice dark green. And I'm going to fill in that background tree as a silhouette. And I'm going to make that dark against this foreground tree so that it'll show up. So this is really dark against lighter. So the foreground tree is a little bit lighter than that background. So it separates the background from the foreground by that different value. It also silhouettes the foreground tree with that dark background. So it accomplishes two things. It gives me a nice dark background color, and also silhouettes and cuts out the shape of the foreground tree. And that tree is behind on the other side of the tree, so it gives me a nice silhouette of that foreground tree now. Now making the foreground tree will be my impact area, so everything around it is going to enhance the foreground tree. So these dark colors now are going to enhance the side of the tree left and right to make it pop out. And over here I'm working around there's a fence line here I'm painting around also. The top of the fence line, there'll be some posts here. So I'm also bringing that on. I'm going to leave the fence white and just paint around it. So this is negative painting. I'm painting negatively around the fence line as negative painting. And here I'm painting in between the fence line railings. So I'm using a negative painting technique here, using the white of the paper for the fence, and then the background shows up the actual rails and fence posts. Positive against negative. So the dark is a positive value and the white paper is a negative value. We have a little bit of quinacridone violet to give me a darker mix, even yet mixed in with that green, so forth. I'm going to put in these shadows on the rooftop with that dark value, and I'm using my design sketch to show me where I put these values. So this rooftop's going to have a shadow over here on this roof, part of the roof. And again, I'm using a positive, negative. I'm using the white paper as a negative value, and a positive value is the dark in the shadow pattern. Leaving the building and structure white, just adding the darks around to define it. You know, just paint a little bit of the shadows under the eaves of the rooftop. And that shows you the final, what I did on the final design of that building, and even onto the little red barn over there. I added in some of those darks. Okay, now the mixture I use is really the real dark mixture I have with that quinacridone violet and the browns and the greens and the blues. I'm going to start working on the limbs. And this is very interesting because this dark color I'm going to paint in underneath. This is the shadow underneath the leaves, but then I'm going to use that shape of those inner leaves. You'll notice here as I begin to paint this, I'm painting the branches behind the foreground or the forward leaves in yellow. So I'm painting the dark limbs and branches in behind the forward row of leaves. Again, this is the technique. I'm just trying it out here in this little color study to see how it works out. See, this is an interesting way to paint this particular tree, give it some interest. Now, from my reference photograph and also from my design, there's quite a few branches on here, so I'm going to put in a lot more branches there, but you can watch and see how I go behind the front row of leaves, which are yellow or yellow-green. I'm going back into those darker areas, which is the inner leaves, or I call them the background leaves of the tree. This way I'm getting positive and negative painting. The positive shape is the yellow-green leaves in the foreground, and the dark branches is the negative going in between. So positive again, here's another example of painting positive against negative. Leaving some of those leaves unpainted. Now, this is an interesting way I can see now. This is working out very well. I can see the example here of painting a limb and branches in that leaf structure to make them show up. Now, as a color study, I'm experimenting, and I may not put this many branches and leaves this way on a final painting, but this gives me an idea of how I would approach this in order to paint this kind of a painting with this large tree. I like the way it's working out. I like the way it's being defined, and I like the gaps that I see. It looks like a real structure here of a tree with lots of limbs, and the photograph shows a lot of limbs also. This foreground tree is the main part of the painting, so I'm taking a lot more time here, a lot more detail, because this is the real focal point, the real main subject of the painting. The tree structure and the limbs with the leaves and the branches. You can see here the buildup of the limbs and branches are continuous, and just painting along and look like it's a stop and start. It's like dots and dashes. You got stop and go. The branches move in between the leaves. The leaves cover up part of the branch, and then you can see through the leaves. You can see part of the branch in behind. That's what you would see in a normal tree. So I think this looks a very realistic way to paint a tree with lots of limbs and lots of leaves and make it look realistic. I'm not following the picture exactly. I'm not following it. I'm not painting from the picture. I'm really painting from my inspiration here of what I put on the tree itself. I'm just moving the branches through the leaves that I made with the dark against light, and I'm just painting the branches in between. But it's a good study on how to paint branches and how to paint this kind of a tree with lots of branches and lots of leaves in behind. So that's the color study that I finished. I think it turned out real well. I like what happened here. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and give me a thumbs up. It helps my rating. And go to my website and order some spray bottles and brushes and paints. See you in the next video.